Kethvar stared at the data screen in his quarters aboard Alliance Command Station Omega-7. The numbers made no sense. How could a species that looked so weak achieve such impossible results in combat? The humans had only joined the Galactic Coalition 6 months ago, yet their battle reports showed victory ratios that defied logic. He touched the screen with one of his forearms, scrolling through the combat statistics. The Nexus Empire had ruled 12 star systems through fear and superior technology for over 2 centuries. They had crushed every rebellion, defeated every Alliance attempt to push them back. Then the humans arrived from a small blue planet called Earth, and everything changed. The humans stood barely 2 meters tall on average. They had no natural armor like his own chitinous plates, no extra limbs for better weapon handling, no enhanced senses that could detect enemies from great distances. Yet in their first 6 engagements with Nexus forces, they had achieved complete victories with minimal losses. Kethvar had served in the Alliance military for 30 years. He had fought the Nexus Empire in 17 major battles and countless smaller skirmishes. He knew their tactics, their weapons, their strengths. The idea that these soft-looking bipeds could succeed where hardened Zephyrian warriors had failed seemed impossible. A soft chime indicated someone at his door. "Enter," Kethvar said in the common tongue. Captain Lisa Martinez stepped into his quarters. She was human, assigned as a liaison officer between Earth forces and the Alliance command structure. She moved with quiet confidence, her dark eyes taking in details of his sparse living space. Like all humans, she seemed fragile compared to his own 2.5-meter frame. "Commander Kethvar," she said with a slight smile. "I understand you volunteered for our joint species combat program." Kethvar nodded. "Your species interests me, Captain Martinez. Your success against the Nexus forces is remarkable, but I confess I do not understand how you achieve such results." Martinez sat in the chair across from his desk. Her movements were precise, economical. "We've learned some things about warfare over the years. Perhaps working together will help both our species understand each other better." "I have reviewed your military history," Kethvar said carefully. "Your planet seems to have experienced considerable conflict." Something shifted in Martinez's expression. The smile remained, but it no longer reached her eyes. "Humans have always been good at fighting, Commander. We've had a lot of practice." The way she said it made Kethvar's secondary hearts beat faster. There was something beneath her calm professional manner, something that reminded him of the predators from his homeworld, creatures that could appear harmless until they revealed their true nature. "I would like to observe human combat methods firsthand," Kethvar said. "Perhaps I could serve aboard one of your vessels." "That can be arranged." Martinez stood and moved to the viewport. Outside, the Alliance fleet prepared for another assault on Nexus positions. "The UNS Defiance is departing for the Kepler 442 system tomorrow. Commander Paul Henderson has agreed to take you aboard." Kethvar had heard of Henderson, a veteran of what humans called their small wars before joining the galactic community. His service record showed dozens of successful operations, but many details remained classified even from Alliance command. "I should warn you," Martinez continued, still looking out at the stars. "Human methods can be disturbing to other species. We fight differently than the rest of the Alliance." "Different how?" Martinez turned back to face him. Her smile had vanished completely. "We don't just fight to win, Commander. We fight to make sure our enemies never want to fight us again." The next morning, Kethvar transported to the human vessel. The UNS Defiance looked different from Alliance ships. Where Zephyrian vessels were elegant and flowing, built for speed and maneuverability, the human ship appeared brutal and functional. Extra armor plating covered critical systems. Weapon ports dotted the hull in patterns that seemed random but probably weren't. Lieutenant Jake Sullivan met him at the airlock. The young human Marine had pale eyes that seemed to look through rather than at things. His uniform was immaculate, his bearing perfect, but something about him made Kethvar's danger instincts activate. "Welcome aboard the Defiance, sir," Sullivan said. His voice was polite, respectful. "Commander Henderson is waiting in his ready room." They walked through corridors that felt too narrow, too cramped compared to Alliance designs. The humans they passed moved with purpose, their faces showing professional courtesy but little warmth. Kethavar noticed modifications to the ships, systems that he couldn't identify, extra conduits running along the walls, panels that didn't match standard Alliance equipment. Commander Henderson's ready room was spartanly furnished. The man behind the desk looked to be in his 50s by human standards, with graying hair and lines around his eyes. He stood as they entered, extending his hand in the human greeting gesture. "Commander Kethavar, I've heard good things about your service record." Henderson's grip was firm, his gaze direct. "I hope you'll find your time with us educational." I'm eager to learn human tactical methods," Kethavar replied. Henderson gestured to a chair. "Before we begin, I should ask what you know about Earth's history. I have reviewed your species' files. Your planet experienced numerous conflicts before achieving space travel." "Conflicts." Henderson repeated the word as if tasting something bitter. "That's one way to put it. In the century before we reached the stars, humans killed over 100 million of our own kind in various wars." Kethavar felt his breathing slow. 100 million deaths was more than the total population of most Alliance worlds. "We learned things," Henderson continued quietly. "About fighting, about surviving, about what it takes to break an enemy's will to resist." He paused. Some of those lessons were harder than others. A chime sounded through the ship's communication system. "All hands prepare for jump to hyperspace," came an announcement. Henderson stood. "We're heading to Kepler 442. Intelligence reports suggest Nexus forces are planning something there. Should give you a chance to see us in action." As they prepared to leave normal space, Kethavar wondered what he had gotten himself into. The humans around him seemed professional and competent, but there was an undercurrent he couldn't identify, something that made his ancient instincts whisper warnings. Martinez had been right about one thing. These humans were different from any species he had encountered. The question was whether that difference would prove to be an advantage or something far more dangerous. The stars shifted outside the viewports as the Defiance entered hyperspace, carrying Kethavar toward his first real lesson in what humans called warfare. The journey to Kepler 442 would take 3 weeks through hyperspace. Kethavar used the time to observe the human crew and try to understand what made them so effective against the Nexus Empire. What he discovered disturbed him more than he expected. The surface, the humans appeared disciplined and professional. They followed orders without question, maintained their equipment with precision, and showed respect for the chain of command. But underneath their military bearing, Kethavar sensed something else, a barely controlled aggression that seemed ready to explode at any moment. He watched them during training exercises in the ship's gymnasium. Where Alliance species practiced for accuracy and efficiency, the humans trained for violence. There, combat drills included scenarios that other races would consider war crimes. They practiced fighting in complete darkness, using improvised weapons and techniques designed not just to disable enemies, but to spread fear among their ranks. "You look troubled, Commander," said Dr. Amy Chen during one of their conversations, in the ship's medical bay. The human psychologist was small even by her species standards, with gentle eyes and a soft voice. Yet something about her made Kethavar's instincts warn him to be careful. "Your training methods are intense," he replied. Chen nodded thoughtfully. "Humans have been fighting each other for thousands of years before we ever met another intelligent species. We developed methods that work against opponents who think like us. But the Nexus Empire does not think like humans. No, but fear is universal." Chen pulled up a holographic display showing human history. "Would you like to understand why we fight the way we do?" The images that followed shocked Kethavar to his core. Massive conflicts involving millions of soldiers. Cities destroyed by weapons that could level entire districts. Industrial facilities designed solely to kill humans more efficiently. Technologies developed for the express purpose of causing terror and breaking enemy morale. "This is your World War II, Chen explained, showing footage of battles across multiple continents. 60 million humans died in 6 years of fighting. We learned that winning isn't just about destroying enemy forces, it's about destroying their will to continue fighting." Kethavar stared at images of human soldiers advancing through burning cities, their faces showing no emotion. "How do you maintain sanity in such conditions?" "We adapt." Chen's voice remained calm, clinical. Humans are remarkably good at adapting to circumstances that would break other species. We call it psychological resilience, but it's really just organized brutality. She showed him more recent conflicts, smaller wars but no less vicious, humans fighting in jungles, deserts, urban environments, always finding new ways to use their environment against enemies, always developing tactics that went beyond simple military objectives. We didn't reach the stars because we're peaceful, Commander, Chen said quietly. We reached them because we learned to channel what we really are. And what are you really? Chen smiled, but it was not a comfortable expression. Survivors, no matter what it cost. Later that day, Kethavar joined a training session led by Sergeant Nick Rodriguez. The human Marine was built like a weapon himself, all muscle and controlled aggression. He demonstrated close combat techniques that seemed designed to cause maximum psychological impact on enemies. The trick, Rodriguez explained while showing how to use a simple knife in ways that would terrify, rather than simply kill, is making the enemy afraid of what you might do next. Fear is a force multiplier. He showed techniques for fighting in zero gravity, in toxic atmospheres, in conditions where most species would be helpless. Humans had apparently encountered all these situations during their expansion into space, and had developed specific methods for each. What happens when you face an enemy who isn't afraid? Kethavar asked. Rodriguez grinned, showing too many teeth. Then we make them afraid. Humans are very creative when it comes to finding things that scare people. The ship's communication system crackled to life. All senior staff to the bridge, came Henderson's voice. They were receiving a distress call from Research Station Delta Prime, a scientific facility studying quantum mechanics near the edge of Nexus space. The transmission was broken, filled with static and screaming. What came through clearly was that the station was under attack and needed immediate assistance. Kethavar joined the senior staff meeting in the ship's briefing room. Alliance protocol would require them to request reinforcements and establish a siege perimeter around the station. The logical approach would be to wait for superior numbers before engaging Nexus forces. How many enemy ships? Henderson asked the tactical officer. Sensors show 3 Nexus destroyers and a command vessel. Lieutenant Kate Morgan replied. They're not trying to destroy the station. Looks like they're interrogating the research staff. Henderson nodded grimly. Torture for information. Standard Nexus procedure. We should contact Alliance Command for reinforcements, suggested the Yao, ship's Alliance liaison, a Talarian named Vextor. Henderson looked around the table at his human officers. Something passed between them, a wordless communication that excluded the non-human crew members. Negative, we're going in now. Sir, 4 enemy vessels against 1 is not good odds, Vextor protested. Not for them, it isn't, Henderson replied. The UI change that came over the human crew after that decision was remarkable. The professional facade didn't disappear exactly, but it shifted into something more predatory. They moved with purpose. Their voices carried new undertones, and their eyes took on a quality that made Kethavar think of hunters stalking prey. Lieutenant Colonel Greg Walsh took command of the boarding party preparations. He was older than most of the Marines, with scars that spoke of extensive combat experience. As he explained the assault plan, Kethavar realized the humans weren't just planning to rescue the research station. They were planning to send a message. We go in fast and hard, Walsh explained to the assembled troops. No quarter for anyone torturing civilians. Make it messy. Make it memorable. Any Nexus survivors need to understand what happens when they mess with Alliance research facilities. Corporal Beth Turner raised her hand. She was small for a human warrior, but something about her made Kethavar's predator recognition instinct scream warnings. Rules of engagement, sir? Geneva Convention applies to humans, Walsh replied. These aren't humans. Kethavar didn't understand the reference, but the satisfied nods from the human troops suggested it was significant. As the Defiance approached the research station, Henderson invited Kethavar to the bridge. You wanted to see human tactical methods in action, the commander said. Consider this your first lesson. On the tactical display, the 4 Nexus vessels appeared confident, maintaining position around the station while their boarding parties conducted interrogations. They had no reason to expect trouble. Alliance forces typically took days or weeks to respond to distress calls in contested space. Signal from the lead Nexus vessel, reported the communications officer. They're demanding, we leave immediately or be destroyed. Henderson smiled, and Keithvar finally understood why that expression made him nervous. It wasn't the smile of someone happy or amused. It was the smile of a predator that had found prey. Send them our response, Henderson ordered. The Defiance's weapon systems came online with a low thrumming that Keithvar could feel through the deck plates. The ship accelerated toward the station, and Keithvar realized he was about to witness what humans called warfare. He was beginning to suspect it would be unlike anything he had experienced before. The assault on Research Station Delta Prime began like nothing Keithvar had ever witnessed. The humans didn't simply attack the Nexus vessels, they hunted them. The Defiance moved through space with predatory grace, using the station's bulk to mask its approach. Henderson had ordered radio silence, but the crew communicated through hand signals and shared looks that spoke of long practice in coordinated violence. Nexus vessels are moving to intercept, reported Lieutenant Morgan from the tactical station. Her voice carried excitement rather than fear. They're confident in their superior numbers. Henderson nodded. Let them think they have the advantage. Weapons, prepare the special packages. Keithvar didn't understand what special packages meant until the first Nexus destroyer exploded in a cascade of brilliant light. The weapon that destroyed it hadn't appeared on any sensors, hadn't shown up on the tactical display. One moment, the enemy ship was maneuvering to attack. The next, it was expanding debris. What was that? Vextor demanded from his position at the science station. Human innovation, Henderson replied calmly. We've learned some new tricks since joining the Alliance. The remaining Nexus vessels immediately changed tactics, recognizing they faced something unexpected. They began evasive maneuvers while calling for reinforcements, but the Defiance was already moving to its next target. The second destroyer died, differently. Instead of a clean explosion, it simply went dark. Life support failed, artificial gravity cut out, and emergency lighting flickered before dying completely. The crew was left floating in a dead ship, slowly suffocating in the cold vacuum of space. Boarding shuttles away, announced Lieutenant Sullivan from the helm. His pale eyes reflected the tactical display's glow. ETA to Station Docking Bay, 4 minutes. Keithvar found himself assigned to the boarding party led by Lieutenant Colonel Walsh. As their shuttle approached the research station, the human Marines around him prepared their equipment with ritual precision. Their weapons were standard, Alliance issue, but they had made modifications that looked improvised yet deliberate. Remember, Walsh addressed his troops over the comm. We're not just here to rescue civilians. We're here to teach the Nexus Empire what happens when they torture Alliance researchers. The shuttle docked with a hard clang that shook everyone inside. Emergency lighting cast red shadows across the Marines' faces as they prepared to breach the station's airlock. Keithvar noticed they moved with absolute silence now, communicating only through hand signals. The station's corridors were filled with the sounds of screaming and mechanical torture devices. Nexus interrogators had set up their equipment in the main laboratory, using the research station's own power systems to run devices designed to extract information through pain. Walsh held up his hand, stopping the team at a junction between corridors. He pointed to Corporal Turner and made a series of gestures that meant nothing to Keithvar, but apparently conveyed complex instructions to her. She nodded and disappeared into the ventilation system with her rifle and a pack of equipment. What happened next shattered Keithvar's understanding of civilized warfare. The humans didn't simply assault the Nexus positions. They turned the station itself into a weapon against its occupiers. Lights began going out in sections, plunging areas into complete darkness. The station's gravity fluctuated randomly, leaving Nexus soldiers floating helplessly or crushed against bulkheads by sudden increases in acceleration. Environmental systems began producing sounds, screams, and whispers that echoed through the corridors with no apparent source. Psychological warfare, Walsh explained quietly to Keithvar as they moved through the chaos. Turner is in the control room, using the station's systems to create fear and confusion. Nexus forces depend on their technology and superior numbers. Take those advantages away, and they're just frightened soldiers in an alien environment. Through the darkness ahead, Keithvar could hear Nexus voices raised in panic and confusion. Their disciplined formations had dissolved into scattered groups of frightened warriors, jumping at shadows and shooting at sounds. Jake Sullivan appeared beside them like a ghost, his movement completely silent despite the heavy combat armor he wore. He gestured toward a side corridor and whispered, 12 Nexus troops holding position near the main lab. They have 3 human prisoners. Walsh nodded. Take them. What followed was not a battle. It was a demonstration of human capabilities. That made Kethavar understand why the Nexus Empire had begun retreating from every system where humans appeared. Sullivan moved through the darkened corridors like death itself. His thermal imaging allowed perfect vision in absolute darkness while the Nexus soldiers were effectively blind. He didn't simply eliminate enemies. He arranged their bodies in ways that would terrorize anyone who found them. One Nexus warrior was left hanging upside down from a light fixture, his weapon disassembled and scattered around the corridor. Another was found with his helmet removed, sitting in a chair facing the direction his comrades would approach from, appearing to be on guard duty, until someone noticed he was no longer breathing. "Why do you do this?" Kethavar asked Walsh as they moved past Sullivan's handiwork. Killing them efficiently would achieve the same tactical objective. Walsh paused in the corridor, his face lit by emergency lighting that cast harsh shadows. Because the ones who escape will tell stories. They'll describe what they saw, what happened to their comrades. Fear spreads faster than any weapon. They reached the main laboratory where Nexus interrogators had been working on captured researchers. 3 human scientists hung from devices, designed to cause maximum pain while extracting information. The Nexus soldiers guarding them were veterans, experienced troops who should have maintained discipline even under pressure. Instead, they huddled in a defensive circle, firing at shadows, and jumping at every sound Turner created through the station's speaker system. When the human Marines finally revealed themselves, the enemy soldiers seemed almost relieved to face a visible threat. The firefight lasted less than 30 seconds. When it ended, most of the Nexus troops were dead, but 2 had been left alive and uninjured. They sat against a wall staring at the human Marines with expressions of absolute terror. "Take them to holding," Walsh ordered. "Make sure they see everything on the way." As they escorted the prisoners through the station, Kethavar realized the humans had orchestrated the entire assault to create maximum psychological impact. Every corridor contained evidence of human capabilities. Bodies arranged to suggest impossible, stealth, weapons destroyed in ways that demonstrated technical superiority, environmental controls used to create an atmosphere of helpless fear. The rescued scientists were human civilians, researchers studying quantum mechanics for peaceful purposes. They had been tortured for information about Alliance defensive capabilities. As the medical team treated their injuries, Kethavar heard one of them whisper to Dr. Chen. "They said humans were weak," the injured researcher said through swollen lips. "Said we were soft creatures who hid behind Alliance protection." Chen's response was delivered in the same gentle tone she always used, but her words carried undertones that made Kethavar's blood run cold. "Did they change their minds?" The researcher managed a painful smile. "I think they might have different opinions now." As the Defiance prepared to leave the research station, Kethavar watched the 2 surviving Nexus prisoners being loaded onto an escape pod. They would be released to return to their fleet, carrying stories of what they had witnessed. Henderson joined him at the observation deck as they watched the pod disappear toward Nexus space. "Your first lesson in human tactical methods," the commander said. "What did you think?" Kethavar was quiet for a long moment, processing what he had seen. "You didn't just rescue the researchers," he said finally. "You sent a message to the entire Nexus Empire." "That's right." Henderson's voice carried satisfaction. "Every Nexus commander will hear about this. They'll know what happens when they torture Alliance civilians. Some of them will decide it's not worth the risk. And those who don't?" Henderson's smile was the expression of a predator contemplating prey. "Then we'll teach them more lessons until they understand." As the Defiance jumped back into hyperspace, Kethavar realized he was beginning to understand what made humans so effective in warfare. They didn't just fight to win battles. They fought to break their enemy's will to continue fighting. The question that haunted him was whether beings capable of such calculated brutality could truly be trusted as allies, or whether the Alliance had simply recruited a more dangerous enemy than the one they sought to defeat. 3 months after the assault on Research Station Delta Prime, Kethavar had witnessed dozens of human operations against Nexus forces. Each victory came with growing horror at what his alliance had unleashed upon the galaxy. The humans had turned warfare into an art form of psychological destruction. The Nexus Empire, once confident in their superior technology and vast numbers, now spoke of humans in hushed, fearful tones. Intelligence reports filtered back through Alliance networks describing Nexus commanders who refused assignments to sectors where human forces operated. Entire fleets had withdrawn from strategic positions rather than face the possibility of encountering Earth's warriors. Fear is a force multiplier, Major Dan Cooper explained during one of their tactical briefings. Cooper commanded the 3rd Human Shock Battalion, a unit that specialized in what they called psychological operations. He was a quiet man with pale scars across his hands and a way of looking at people that made them uncomfortable. One terrified. Enemy tells 10 others, Cooper continued, projecting holographic battle reports onto the briefing room's main screen. 10 terrified enemies convince 100 to surrender without fighting. It's exponential mathematics applied to warfare. Kethavar studied the reports. In system after system, Nexus forces were abandoning positions without engaging human units. The mere possibility that humans might be present had become enough to cause strategic retreats. But this creates instability throughout the region, he observed. Cooper nodded. Temporary instability in exchange for permanent peace. The Nexus Empire expanded through terror and superior firepower. We're using their own methods against them, but more efficiently. The humans had begun recruiting volunteers from other Alliance species to learn their methods. Staff Sergeant Kelly Brooks ran these programs from a training facility established in the outer hull of Alliance Command Station Omega-7. Brooks was a small woman with sharp eyes who spoke softly and never raised her voice, yet somehow commanded absolute attention from everyone around her. Traditional Alliance tactics focus on minimizing casualties and achieving military objectives through superior strategy, Brooks explained to a mixed group of Alliance officers during one of her lectures. Human tactics focus on breaking the enemy's will to fight in the first place. She showed them recordings from recent operations. Nexus facilities captured without firing a shot because the defenders had heard stories about human capabilities. Enemy fleets that jumped to hyperspace the moment human ships appeared on their sensors. Entire star systems that surrendered rather than face the possibility of human occupation. You're teaching them to think like predators, observed Commander Zixhai, a reptilian officer with extensive combat experience. This goes against every principle of civilized warfare. Brooks smiled, an expression that reminded Kethavar of the predators from his homeworld. Civilized warfare is what got the Alliance locked in a stalemate with the Nexus Empire for 2 centuries. We ended that stalemate in 6 months. The training programs were voluntary, but they were filling up rapidly. Alliance officers were beginning to understand that traditional methods were inadequate against enemies who respected only superior force and psychological dominance. The humans were teaching them to project both. Kethavar participated in one of these programs, partly from professional curiosity and partly from growing concern about what the Alliance was becoming. The course lasted 2 weeks and fundamentally changed his understanding of warfare. Rule 1, Brooks began on the first day. Your enemy's greatest weapon is their confidence. Take that away, and you've won before the first shot is fired. She taught them to think beyond immediate tactical objectives. Every action should serve multiple purposes. Achieving the military goal, gathering intelligence, and most importantly, creating psychological effects that would influence future operations. Human warfare was as much about propaganda and terror as it was about weapons and strategy. Rule 2, she continued. Never let your enemy understand your capabilities until it's too late. Mystery is more frightening than known strength. The humans had developed technologies and tactics that they revealed selectively, always keeping their full capabilities hidden. The weapon that had destroyed the first Nexus destroyer at the research station remained classified. Alliance scientists were still trying to understand how the Defiance had disabled the second ship without visible damage. We don't share everything with our allies, Brooks admitted when Kethavar asked about human technological capabilities. Not because we don't trust you, but because secrets kept are weapons preserved. By the end of the second week, Kethavar found himself thinking differently about military problems. Instead of focusing purely on tactical solutions, he began considering psychological effects, long-term strategic implications, and the value of creating fear among potential enemies. It was during this time that the humans achieved their most disturbing victory yet. They captured a Nexus command ship, the flagship of Admiral Krextar, one of the Empire's most experienced military leaders. Instead of studying the vessel or interrogating its crew, they turned it into what they called a ghost ship. The operation was planned by Commander Henderson, with input from Dr. Chen and her psychological warfare specialists. They left the ship functional, but filled it with evidence of human experiments on the crew. Nothing actually happened to the Nexus prisoners, but the staged scene suggested capabilities that went far beyond conventional warfare. Perception is reality in psychological operations, Henderson explained when Kethvar questioned the ethics of the deception. The Nexus, Empire believes humans are capable of things we would never actually do. We're simply confirming their fears. When other Nexus forces found the ghost ship drifting in space, the psychological impact exceeded all human expectations. 3 entire fleets retreated from the war rather than face enemies capable of such acts. Nexus recruitment dropped by 70% in the following month as word spread about human capabilities. Kethvar began to realize that humans hadn't joined the Alliance as junior partners seeking protection and guidance. They had joined as something far more dangerous, beings who understood warfare at a level that transcended physical combat and entered the realm of psychological dominance. "We're not the monsters here," Henderson said when Kethvar expressed his concerns about human methods. "We're just very good at finding the monster in everyone else." The commander was right in a technical sense. Humans didn't actually commit the acts their enemies feared, but they had become masters at creating fear of capabilities they might possess, uncertainties that paralyzed enemy decision-making, and psychological pressure that broke enemy morale before battles began. Dr. Chen provided the scientific perspective during one of their regular conversations in the ship's medical bay. "Humans evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill us," she explained while reviewing psychological profiles of captured Nexus officers, plants, animals, weather, diseases, and especially other humans. "We learned to recognize threats and project our own threatening presence as survival mechanisms." She showed him brain scans of human soldiers during combat operations. The patterns were unlike anything seen in other species. Where Alliance warriors showed stress and fear responses during battle, humans displayed a complex mix of heightened awareness and controlled aggression that actually improved their performance under pressure. "We're not naturally more violent than other species," Chen continued. "We're naturally more efficient at violence. There's a significant difference." As their tour of duty continued, Kethvar watched the war changing around them. Nexus forces were abandoning strategic positions, avoiding engagements with human units, and showing signs of systematic demoralization that went beyond normal combat stress. The humans had weaponized fear itself and turned it against an empire built on intimidation and superior firepower. But the Alliance was changing too. Other species were adopting human methods, learning to think like predators, and developing their own psychological warfare capabilities. The galaxy was becoming a more dangerous place, even as it became more peaceful through the elimination of Nexus resistance. Kethvar found himself wondering whether they had found the perfect allies in humanity, or whether they had simply recruited a more efficient form of darkness to fight the darkness they already faced. The distinction was becoming harder to make with each passing day. 6 months after joining the human crew of the UNS Defiance, Kethvar found himself participating in what would become the final battle of the war. The Nexus Empire, once spanning dozens of star systems with fleets that numbered in the thousands, had been reduced to defending their homeworld through nothing more than sheer terror of human capabilities. The assault fleet that gathered at Nexus Prime was the largest Alliance force ever assembled. Ships from dozens of species formed attack formations that stretched across the system's outer planets. Yet for all their overwhelming numbers and superior technology, everyone knew the outcome would be decided by the psychological warfare capabilities of a single species. Admiral Carol Wright commanded the human contingent from her flagship, the UNS Retribution. She was a small woman with gray hair and quiet eyes who spoke in measured tones about subjects that would have horrified previous generations of Alliance leadership. Wright had overseen the transformation of galactic warfare from a contest of military strength into a campaign of systematic psychological dominance. The Nexus Empire built their power on fear, Wright explained during the final strategy briefing. They expanded by demonstrating to other species that resistance would result in total destruction. We're going to use that same principle against them, but more efficiently. Kethavar attended the briefing alongside officers from dozens of Alliance species. All of them had learned human methods over the past months, but none had fully grasped what humanity really represented until Wright began explaining the final phase of operations. "We will not destroy Nexus Prime," she announced. "We will not invade their cities or occupy their government centers. We will not fire a single weapon at their homeworld." The Alliance officers looked confused. How could they achieve victory? Without actual combat? Wright activated a holographic display showing psychological warfare broadcasts that had been transmitted toward Nexus Prime for the past month. The messages didn't threaten invasion or destruction. They simply described, in clinical detail, what humans were capable of doing to populations that resisted Alliance authority. "Every Nexus citizen has heard these broadcasts," Wright continued. "They know about our capabilities. They've heard stories from their own military forces about what happens when humans engage in warfare. They understand that continued resistance means facing enemies who have turned psychological terror into a precision weapon." The broadcasts were masterpieces of psychological manipulation. They didn't explicitly threaten the Nexus population, but they described human capabilities in ways that allowed listeners to imagine the worst possible scenarios. References to population management techniques developed during Earth's resource wars, discussions of efficient methods for restructuring resistant societies, clinical descriptions of behavioral modification programs that ensure long-term compliance. None of it was technically threatening, but the implications were clear to anyone familiar with human methods. The Nexus population was being given a choice: surrender immediately or face enemies who understood how to break entire civilizations through carefully applied psychological pressure. "Sir," interrupted Commander Thalvin, a Centaurian officer with extensive combat experience, "psychological warfare is effective against military forces, but entire populations usually resist occupation regardless of the threats involved." Wright smiled, and Kethavar recognized the expression that had become familiar over months of serving with humans. It was the smile of a predator that had already won the hunt and was simply waiting for the prey to realize their situation. "Commander, Thalvin makes an excellent point," Wright said. "Populations do usually resist occupation, even under threat of overwhelming force. But we're not occupying anyone." She explained the true nature of human strategy. The Alliance didn't need to conquer the Nexus Empire. They needed to eliminate it as a threat while demonstrating to the rest of the galaxy what happened to civilizations that chose warfare over cooperation. The Nexus government would surrender voluntarily, their military forces would disband without fighting, and their population would restructure their society to prevent future conflicts. "How can you be certain they'll surrender without a fight?" asked Kethavar. Wright's expression became serious. "Because they've already started. Nexus military communications show systematic abandonment of defensive positions. Their government is broadcasting requests for negotiation. Their population centers are already implementing the social restructuring we suggested in our broadcasts. The assault on Nexus Prime, planned to be the bloodiest battle of the war, instead became the shortest." The Nexus government surrendered 4 hours after the Alliance fleet entered their star system. No weapons were fired, no ships were destroyed, no soldiers died. The surrender broadcast from Nexus Prime was a masterpiece of human psychological warfare. Instead of demanding harsh terms or threatening further resistance, the Nexus leadership simply acknowledged that continued conflict was pointless. They agreed to Alliance terms without negotiation and began implementing the social changes that would prevent future military expansion. "Sir," Lieutenant Sullivan reported from the communication station, "we're receiving surrender signals from all remaining Nexus military forces. They're requesting instructions for disbanding their fleets." Wright nodded as if she had expected. "Nothing else. Acknowledge their transmissions. Provide them with coordinates for neutral systems where they can process out of military service." In the aftermath of the surrender, Admiral Wright called a meeting of all Alliance leadership aboard the Retribution. The conference room was filled with representatives from dozens of species. many of whom were still trying to understand how the war had ended without a final battle. I want to address some concerns that have been raised about human methods, Wright began. Some of you are troubled by our approach to warfare. Some of you question whether humanity can be trusted as an ally rather than feared as a potential enemy. She activated a new holographic display, this one showing Earth's history in more detail than Kethvar had ever seen. The images were horrifying. Weapons that could destroy entire cities, conflicts that killed millions, technologies developed specifically to cause maximum suffering to human enemies. Humanity spent thousands of years perfecting warfare against our own species, Wright continued. We developed methods so effective that we nearly drove ourselves extinct. By the time we achieved space travel, we had learned that our capabilities represented a choice. We could use them to conquer the galaxy, or we could use them to protect it. The room was absolutely silent as Wright explained humanity's true nature. Earth hadn't been a peaceful world that learned to fight. It had been a world of predators that learned to cooperate. Humans had spent millennia developing methods of warfare that were so psychologically devastating that they had eventually turned them against the concept of warfare itself. We joined the Alliance not because we needed protection, Wright said quietly. We joined because the galaxy needed protection from us. The choice wasn't whether humanity would reach the stars. It was whether we'd do it as friends or conquerors. Kethvar finally understood his role in the human crew. He hadn't been there to protect humans or learn from them. He had been there as a witness, to assure the Alliance that humanity could be trusted to wage war on behalf of their allies, rather than against them. The Nexus Empire represented everything we once were, Wright continued. A civilization built on conquest and intimidation. We ended their expansion not through superior firepower, but by demonstrating what they would become if they continued down that path. She paused, looking around the room at representatives of species that had been locked in stalemate with the Nexus Empire for centuries. Every species in this room has the potential to become what the Nexus Empire was. Humans have the demonstrated capability to become something far worse. Our presence in the Alliance serves as a reminder to everyone, including ourselves, about the importance of choosing cooperation over conquest. As the meeting ended and Alliance leaders began planning for the post-war galaxy, Kethvar found himself writing his final report on human capabilities. His recommendations would influence Alliance policy for decades to come. I volunteered to fight alongside humans, he concluded, and learned that in the darkness between stars, there is nothing more terrifying than a species that weaponized its own nightmares and chose to aim them away from friends. He recommended that humanity be granted full military autonomy within Alliance space, with one crucial condition. No Alliance species should ever face humanity as an enemy. The galaxy had been fortunate that Earth's predators had chosen to become protectors instead of conquerors. Kethvar submitted his report to Alliance Command and began preparing for his return to normal military service. But he knew he would never be the same. He had seen what happened when the ultimate predators chose to hunt on behalf of their prey instead of against them. The galaxy was safer now, but it was also more dangerous than anyone realized. Humanity had ended one war through the mere threat of capabilities they hoped never to use. The question that would define the future was whether such terrible power could remain in the service of peace, or whether it would eventually be turned toward darker purposes.